Close your eyes now and let yourself drift. Tonight we journey through the mists of time to explore one of humanity's oldest fears, the boundary between life and death and those who walk between, the zombie, not the creature of modern horror, but something far older, quieter, and more human. Before you sleep, if you're finding peace in these words, consider subscribing so you can return to this calm place whenever you need rest. But for now, simply breathe and listen. Let your breathing slow now, in and out, gentle as a river flowing through time. We're going to travel together, you and I, back through the centuries. Back before nations and borders, before books and screens, before the modern world with all its noise and light. We're traveling back 5,000 years, to a place between two rivers, where civilization first learned to write, to build, to dream. This is ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, where the first zombie stories were born under stars that looked the same then as they do now. Close your eyes and feel the warmth of that ancient sun on your skin. The air is dry, scented with dust and river water. In the distance you can hear the murmur of a marketplace, the bleating of goats, the rhythmic strike of hammers shaping clay bricks. This is the cradle of human civilization, where priests first learned to mark their thoughts on wet clay tablets, where the earliest stories of humanity were pressed into soft earth and baked hard by fire and time. Among these stories, one stands above all others. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Let that name settle in your mind like sediment at the bottom of a river. Gilgamesh. It's one of the oldest stories we still possess, older than the Bible, older than the Iliad, older than almost anything written that survives to this day. And within its verses, carved in cuneiform script, on tablets that have outlasted empires, lies one of the first recorded instances of the dead rising to walk among the living. Breathe slowly now. Feel your body sinking deeper into comfort as we sink deeper into this ancient tale. In the epic, the goddess Ishtar, powerful and proud, falls in love with Gilgamesh, the mighty king of Uruk. But Gilgamesh, knowing her reputation for discarding lovers cruelly, refuses her advances. Imagine Ishtar's rage. A goddess scorned, her divine pride wounded. In her fury she goes to her father Anu, the sky god, and demands revenge. When he hesitates, she makes a threat so terrible, so profound, that it echoes through millennia to reach us here, now in this quiet moment before sleep. She threatens to break down the gates of the underworld itself, to smash open the doors that separate the living from the dead, to raise up all the souls of the departed, every single one who has ever died, and send them streaming back to the world above. And she promises, this in words that chill even across the gulf of 5,000 years, I will let the dead go up to eat the living. The dead will outnumber the living. Let those words wash over you like a tide. The dead will outnumber the living. This is perhaps the first recorded zombie apocalypse, the first time human beings set down in permanent form their fear of being overwhelmed by those who have passed beyond. But notice something important as you rest here. Breathing slowly, letting tension drain from your shoulders. These weren't monsters in the modern sense. They weren't rotting corpses hungry for flesh. They were simply the dead, returned. In the Mesopotamian worldview, death was not an ending but a transition. The dead traveled to Urkala, the underworld, a dark and dusty realm beneath the earth where they existed, as pale shadows of their former selves. They weren't being punished necessarily, nor were they in paradise. They simply were, in a dim half-existence, sustained by offerings fro. The living world above. Picture this realm now, vast caverns filled with silent shades, all dressed in feather garments, dwelling in darkness, eating dust and clay for sustenance. Your breath is steady now, regular and slow. Feel yourself sinking like one descending into that ancient underworld, but safely, peacefully, knowing you can return whenever you wish. The Mesopotamians believed these dead needed the living. They needed proper burial rites, needed food offerings, needed their names spoken and remembered. Without these things, the dead became restless. They became angry. They would wander. These wandering spirits, these dead who were not properly cared for, were the real terror. They were called Gidim in Sumerian, Etemu in Akkadian, ghosts, revenants. The unsettled dead. A person who died far from home, who couldn't be properly buried, whose body was lost to the desert or the river, their spirit would roam, unable to find peace. A person who died without children to make off. Rings, who had no one to speak their name, they too would wander, desperately seeking sustenance in a world that had forgotten them. Let your mind drift now through the streets of ancient Uruk, that great city of Gilgamesh. The sun has set, and darkness covers the mud brick buildings. Most people are inside their homes, oil lamps casting warm, flickering light through doorways. But some lights burn in the temples, where priests perform the evening rituals. You can hear them chanting in Sumerian, a language lost now to all but scholars. Sounds that would seem alien to us but were once as familiar as breathing to those who lived in that time and place. These priests understood the delicate balance between the living and the dead. They knew the rituals that kept the dead content in their shadowy realm below. They made offerings of food and beer, pouring libations into the earth so the dead could drink. They spoke the names of the ancestors, keeping their memory alive, giving them identity and substance in that dark underworld. This wasn't just religious observance. This was survival. This was keeping the natural order intact, keeping the dead where they belonged. Imagine the weight of that responsibility, carrying it every day, knowing that negligence could result in the dead returning to trouble the living. The Mesopotamians had rituals for almost everything related to death. If someone died a bad death, violently or tragically, special rites were needed. If someone drowned in the river, their body unrecovered, the family would create a substitute body, a representation, so the proper funeral could be performed. Without this, the dead person's spirit would be trapped, neither fully in the underworld nor free in the living world, existing in a terrible liminal space. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful. You're drifting between waking and sleeping, between consciousness and dreams, existing in your own liminal space. But this one is safe, this one is warm, this on. E leads only to rest. The Mesopotamians feared that in-between state, but you can embrace it, sinking deeper with each breath. There were exorcists in ancient Mesopotamia, specialists who could deal with troublesome spirits. They were called asipu, and they possessed extensive knowledge of rituals, incantations, and magical practices. If a person was troubled by a ghost, if they were experiencing illness or misfortune believed to be caused by an angry spirit, they would call upon an asipu. These specialists would perform elaborate ceremonies, sometimes creating clay or wax figurines representing the ghost, binding it, controlling it, sending it back to where it belonged. The clay tablets that survive from this time contain hundreds of these incantations. Think of them, those ancient rectangles of baked earth, covered in wedge-shaped marks, each one preserving words spoken 5,000 years ago to comfort the living and placate the dead. Some of these incantations are heartbreaking in their humanity. They speak to the dead directly, acknowledging their suffering, asking them to release their hold on the living, promising them that they are remembered, that offerings will be made, that they are not forgotten. Let yourself feel the depth of time as you rest here. 5,000 years. Empires have risen and fallen. Languages have been born and died. The very landscape has changed, rivers shifting their courses, cities buried under sand and time. But human fear, human love, human hope, these remain constant. The Mesopotamians feared death and loved their families just as we do. They wanted to believe that the dead could find peace, that remembrance mattered, that love transcended the grave. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, after his dear friend Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is consumed by grief and terror. He cannot accept that death is final, that his friend is gone forever. He embarks on a desperate quest to find immortality, traveling to the ends of the earth, crossing the waters of death itself, all to avoid the fate that awaits every living being. His journey is ultimately futile. He learns that death is inevitable, that humans cannot become like gods, that mortality is woven into the very fabric of human existence. But there is a moment, a precious moment, when Gilgamesh is allowed to speak with Enkidu's spirit, risen briefly from the underworld. Enkidu tells him of the realm of the dead, describes the conditions there, explains how those with many sons are blessed with water to drink, while those with none suffer. This communication between the living and the dead is tender and terrible. It shows us that the Mesopotamians believed the boundary between life and death, while real, was not absolute. The dead could return, at least in some form, at least for a moment. Your body is so relaxed now, your mind drifting like a leaf on the Euphrates, carried gently by currents you need not fight. In this state between waking and sleeping, you might understand what ancient Mesopotamians felt, that sense of the dead being not entirely gone, present somehow in memory and ritual, in dreams and shadows. But you need not fear. The dead they feared were those unmourned, uncared for, forgotten. The dead who were loved, who were remembered, who received proper rites. They rested peacefully in their appointed place. When Ishtar threatened to raise the dead, to let them outnumber the living, she was threatening to destroy this careful balance. She would break open the gates and release everyone, the cared for and the forgotten, the peaceful and the angry, all of them flooding back into a world that could not contain them. It was a threat of cosmic disorder, of the natural boundaries being shattered, of death itself losing its meaning. This is why the threat was so powerful, why it resonated then and why it resonates now, why the image of the dead rising to overwhelm the living has never lost its power to disturb us. Picture those oil lamps in the temples. Again, flames dancing in the darkness, casting long shadows on mud brick walls. The priests continue their chants, maintaining the ancient rituals, keeping the dead content in their darkness below. The living go about their lives above, farming the rich soil between the rivers, raising children, telling stories, loving and fighting, and working and resting, just as humans have always done. And beneath it all, vast and patient, the underworld waits, the realm of Ereshkigal, queen of the dead, where all eventually journey and none return. Except in stories, except in threats, except in nightmares and legends, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, preserved on clay, waiting 5,000 years to tell us about the first zombie apocalypse that never was, the dead who might have risen but didn't, the gates that might have opened but remained closed. The story survives, and we survive, and the dead remain where they belong, and you remain here, safe and warm, breathing slowly, drifting peacefully, carry. By time, like those ancient rivers carried their waters to the sea. Rest your mind here a moment longer, in ancient Mesopotamia, under those ancient stars, feeling the weight of time, and the comfort of knowing that humanity has always feared death, always loved life, always told stories to make sense of the darkness. And then let yourself drift beyond even this, into sleep, into peace, into that nightly death that is only rest, that we enter knowing we will wake again, unlike those ancient dead who descended to the land of no return. The Epic of Gilgamesh ends with the hero accepting mortality, returning to his city, finding meaning not in eternal life, but in the works he has created, the walls he has built, the stories that will outlast his body. And so we too can rest, knowing that this daily rehearsal of death we call sleep is nothing to fear, that we will rise again with the sun, that the dead remain in their place and the living in theirs, and all is as it should be in the great balance of things. Now drift northward with me. Let your mind travel like a bird on winter winds, soaring over lands and seas, over forests that grow darker and denser, over mountains that rise like the bones of the earth itself. We're leaving the warm deserts of Mesopotamia behind, traveling to a place of a different kind of darkness, a different kind of cold. We're going to Scandinavia, to the land of the midnight sun and the endless winter night, where the Vikings told their stories and the Draugr walked. Breathe in deeply, and imagine you can taste the cold air, crisp and clean, sharp in your lungs like the first breath of winter. This is the north, where winter nights stretch for months, where the sun barely rises above the horizon before sinking again into darkness, where survival itself was a daily challenge against the elements. Here, in longhouses built of timber and turf, families gathered around central hearths, the fire crackling and popping, sending sparks spiraling up int. Oh, the smoke-darkened rafters. Let your body settle deeper into comfort as we settle into this scene. Outside, the wind howls across the landscape, driving snow before it, piling it in drifts against the walls of the longhouse. But inside there is warmth, there is light, there are people pressed close together, sharing body heat and stories. The smell of wood smoke mingles with the scent of cooking meat, of damp wool, of the earth itself. And in this warmth, with the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, the skalds begin to tell their tales. The skalds were the storytellers, the poets, the keepers of memory in a culture that did not yet write its sagas in books. They memorized hundreds of stories, thousands of lines of poetry, keeping alive the deeds of heroes and the warnings of the ancestors. Their voices would rise and fall with dramatic cadence, sometimes singing, sometimes speaking, always captivating. And among their most chilling tales were those of the Draugr. Let that word settle into your mind as you sink toward sleep. Draugr. It comes from the Old Norse verb draugr, meaning to haunt, related to the word for ghost or phantom. But the Draugr was more than a ghost, more substantial, more dangerous. The Draugr was a corpse that refused to stay buried, that rose from its grave mound with terrible purpose and uncanny strength. But breathe easily, for these are only stories, only words spoken by firelight long ago, and you are safe here, warm and protected. The Vikings believed that death was not always an ending. Most people, when they died, would travel to Hell, the realm of the goddess Hel, where they would exist in a shadowy afterlife. Warriors who died gloriously in battle might be chosen by the Valkyries to go to Valhalla, Odin's great hall, where they would feast and fight until Ragnarok, the end of the world. But some dead did not go to any afterlife at all. Some remained in their burial mounds, conscious and aware, guarding their grave goods with a loose fury. Picture these burial mounds now, as your breathing slows and deepens. They dot the Scandinavian landscape still, grass-covered hills that are not quite natural, rounded humps in the earth that mark where the dead were laid to rest. Inside these mounds, called barrows or hauger in Old Norse, the dead were buried with everything they might need: weapons and armor, jewelry and coins, sometimes even ships, horses, and slaves sacrificed to accompany them. The Vikings believed in being prepared for the afterlife, in ensuring the dead had status and comfort wherever they went. But sometimes, the dead didn't go anywhere at all. Sometimes they stayed right there in the mound, sitting with their treasures, waiting. And if anyone dared to disturb them, to break into the sacred barrow seeking gold or silver or the fine swords buried with ancient warriors, they would face the wrath of the Draugr. Your eyelids are growing heavy now, heavy as the stone doors that sealed those ancient buria. Mounds. The Draugr was no mindless monster. This is important to understand as you drift deeper toward sleep. The Draugr retained its personality, its memories, its grudges and desires from life. It knew who it had been. It remembered why it was buried there. And it would defend its grave and its treasures with cunning and ferocity. In the sagas, the old stories written down centuries later from oral tradition, the Draugr are described in vivid, unsettling detail. They are corpse blue or black, swollen to enormous size, heavy as oxen. Their bodies do not decay in the normal way. Instead, they seem preserved, bloated, terrible to behold. They possess supernatural strength, able to crush men with their bare hands, to tear apart anyone foolish enough to enter their domain. Some can change their shape, becoming seals or great bulls. Some can control the weather, raising storms to dash ships against rocks or bury farms in snow. But despite all this power, despite all this horror, there is something almost pitiable about the Draugr. They are tied to their burial mounds, bound to their treasures, unable to truly move on. They are prisoners of their own possessions, of their own desire to hold on to what was theirs in life. Let this thought wash over you gently as you rest. The Draugr were warnings, you see, about the dangers of greed, about holding too tightly to material things, about the poison of possessiveness. Picture the aurora borealis now, dancing across the northern sky. Have you ever seen it? Those curtains of green and purple light, shimmering and flowing like silk in an invisible wind. The Vikings called it different names, sometimes seeing in it the armor of the Valkyries reflecting light as they rode to collect the souls of the fallen. On nights when the aurora was particularly brilliant, particularly active, people would stay inside, fearful, knowing that the barriers between the worlds were thin, that the supernatural was close. On such nights, stories of Draugr seemed especially real. Imagine you're there, in that longhouse, the fire burning low now, children asleep in the arms of their mothers, the wind still howling outside. An old woman, her face deeply lined, her hands gnarled from decades of work, begins to tell a story. Her voice is soft but carries in the quiet, and everyone still awake leans in to listen. She tells of a man named Thorolf, a powerful chieftain who died and was buried in his ship within a great mound near his farm. But Thorolf was a cruel man in life, greedy and violent, and death did not improve his disposition. His Draugr began to walk at night, killing livestock, attacking people on the roads, even entering houses to throttle sleeping men and women. The land around his barrow became cursed, cattle died, crops failed, and the aurora blazed night after night in the sky above. Finally, a hero had to be called, a man brave and strong enough to face the Draugr. The saga describes how he broke into the mound, how he found Thorolf sitting there in the darkness, bloated and terrible, how they fought in that confined space, grappling in the dark with the dead. The hero prevailed eventually, beheading the Draugr, burning its body, and scattering the ashes in the sea where they could never come together again. Only then did peace return to the land. Let yourself sink deeper now, deeper than those scattered ashes in the cold northern sea. The Draugr stories had a purpose beyond entertainment. They taught important lessons about how to live and how to die. They warned against greed, against the accumulation of treasure for its own sake, against the desire to control things even beyond death. They taught that some boundaries should not be crossed, that graves should remain undisturbed, that the dead deserve respect and distance. There are dozens of Draugr stories in the Icelandic sagas, each one slightly different, each one revealing something about Viking culture and fears. Some Draugr are almost aesthetic, protecting their families even in death, driving away those who would harm their descendants. Others are purely malevolent, embodiments of evil that plague entire districts. But all of them share that quality of being tied to place, bound to their burial mounds, unable or unwilling to move on to whatever comes next. The Vikings had specific rituals to prevent someone from becoming a Draugr. If a person was particularly troublesome in life, if they were cruel or greedy or gave signs of malicious intent, precautions would be taken at burial. Sometimes the corpse would be laid face down, so if it tried to dig its way out, it would dig deeper instead of up. Sometimes needles would be driven through the feet to prevent walking. Sometimes the body would be taken out of the house through a hole in the wall rather than the door, and the hole immediately sealed, confusing the dead person's spirit so it couldn't find its way back. Breathe slowly, feeling the weight of these old fears. His old protections. How seriously they took death, how carefully they tried to ensure the proper order of things. The living belonged in the world above, in the light, in the warmth of the longhouse. The dead belonged in the earth, in the mounds, in the quiet darkness with their treasures. When these realms mixed, when the dead walked among the living, disaster followed. Snow is falling now in your imagination. Can you feel it? Soft flakes drifting down from an iron-gray sky, settling on the rounded shapes of ancient barrows, covering them in white like a blanket. The aurora has faded with approaching dawn, and the land is still, held in winter's grip. The burial mounds stand silent on the hillside, dark shapes beneath their covering of snow. Whatever is inside them remains inside, sleeping or waiting or guarding, separated from the world by earth and stone and centuries. The Draugr reminds us that some things should remain buried. Not every treasure needs to be claimed, not every secret needs to be unearthed. Not every door needs to be opened. There is wisdom in leaving certain things undisturbed, in respecting boundaries, in understanding that curiosity and greed can lead to consequences we are not prepared to face. Let that snow cover you now like a blanket, cold but not unpleasant, clean and pure, quieting the world. Under the snow, everything is muffled, softened, peaceful. The Draugr sleeps in its mound. The living sleep in their longhouse. The land itself seems to sleep, waiting for spring, for warmth, for the return of light. And you can sleep too, knowing that the old fears have passed into story, that the Draugr exists now only in tales told by firesides, in sagas written in ancient books, in the folklore that has traveled down through the centuries to reach us here. The Vikings are long gone now, their longhouses rotted away, their ships broken on rocks or burned in ceremonies, their swords rusted to nothing in the earth. But their stories remain. The Draugr remains, not as a physical threat but as a symbol, a reminder, a warning that still has power. We still tell stories of the dead who will not rest. We still fear the consequences of greed. We still understand, instinctively, that some boundaries exist for good reason. Rest now in the cold, clean darkness of the northern night. The aurora has faded completely. The snow continues to fall, gentle and relentless, covering the world in white. The burial mounds stand on the hillside, patient and eternal, keeping their secrets, holding their dead. And you are far from them, safe and warm, drifting on the edge of sleep, protected by time and distance, and the simple fact that Draugr were never real, only feared, only imagined, only given life by the power of story and belief. Let the last thought before sleep be this. The Draugr taught the Vikings to hold their possessions lightly, to remember that they could take nothing with them, that clinging too tightly to the treasures of this world could trap them, could keep them from moving on to whatever awaited beyond. It's a good lesson, a peaceful lesson. Hold nothing too tightly, let go. Release your grip on the day that is past, on the worries that trouble your mind, on everything except this moment of rest. Like the Vikings finally leaving their burial treasures behind when they truly died, when their Draugr form was defeated and scattered to the winds, let go now, and drift into peaceful, dreamless sleep, where no guardian waits, no treasure beckons, and no restless dead disturb the quiet dark. The snow falls, the night deepens, the stories are told, and sleep, inevitable and welcome as winter itself, claims you at last. Your breath is steady now, rhythmic and calm, like waves lapping at a distant shore. Feel yourself sinking deeper, deeper than the snow-covered barrows of the north, traveling south now, across ocean and time, to a place where the air is thick and warm, where the night hums with life, where history weighs heavy on the present. We're going to Haiti, to a small island in the Caribbean, where the zombie was never fiction, never fantasy, never just a story told to frighten children in the dark. Breathe in the warm night air, humid and dense, carrying the scent of tropical flowers, of rich earth, of the sea. This is Haiti, Haiti, in the indigenous Taino language, a place of profound beauty and profound suffering, where cultures collided and merged, where African, indigenous and European traditions wove together into something entirely new. The palm fronds rustle overhead, a constant whisper in the breeze that never quite stops, even in the deepest hours of night. Close your eyes and let yourself be here, in this warm darkness. The moon is bright overhead, turning the landscape silver in shadow. In the distance, you can hear drums, the steady pulse of Vodou ceremonies that might continue until dawn. Closer, the night insects sing their endless songs, frogs call from hidden places, and where a dog barks once, then falls silent. This is a place alive with spirits, with memory, with stories that blur the line between the living and the dead, between the natural and supernatural. In Haiti, the word is zonbi. Let it rest on your tongue, that strange word brought from Africa and transformed in this new world. Zonbi. Not a creature of horror films, not a mindless flesh-eater, but something far more terrible because it was believed to be real. The zonbi was a person robbed of their will, their personality, their very self, a body that moved and worked but contained no soul, no consciousness, no hope of escape. And this was not ancient mythology like the Draugr or the tales of Mesopotamia. This was modern. This was real to the people who lived there. This was fear you could touch. Settle deeper into comfort now as we explore this darkness together, knowing you are safe, that this is only history, only story, only the past reaching out to teach us. The zonbi tradition is rooted in Vodou, often spelled voodoo in English, but more properly Vodou from the Fon language of West Africa. Vodou is not evil, despite what Hollywood has told you. It is a religion, a system of belief as complex and meaningful as any other, born from the forced merger of African spiritual traditions with Catholicism under the brutal conditions of slavery. When enslaved Africans were brought to Haiti, then called Saint-Domingue, they carried their beliefs with them. The French colonizers tried to destroy these beliefs, tried to force Christianity upon them, but the enslaved people resisted in the only way they could. They adapted. They syncretized. They hid their African deities, their LWA, behind the masks of Catholic saints. They practiced their rituals in secret, in the forests, under cover of night, keeping alive the spiritual traditions that connected them to their homeland, to their ancestors, to themselves.
Vodou recognizes a supreme creator, Bondi, but he is too distant for
daily worship. Instead, people serve the LWA, spirits who act as intermediaries, each with their own personality, preferences, and domains of influence. There is Legba, keeper of the crossroads between the human and spirit worlds. There is Erzuli, spirit of love and beauty. There is Baron Samedi, guardian of the dead, often depicted in top hat and dark glasses, smoking cigars and drinking rum. And there are the practitioners, the priests and priestesses called Houngans and Mambos, who facilitate communication between the human and spiritual realms. But there is another type of practitioner, one spoken of with fear and whispered warnings. The Bokor. Let that word settle into your drowsy mind. Bokor, a sorcerer who works with both hands, as they say, with both light and dark magic. A Bokor knows the rituals of healing but also the rituals of harm. They can protect, but they can also curse. And most terrifying of all, they can create zonbi. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful. The process of creating a zonbi, according to Vodou belief, involves a terrible theft. The Bokor must capture the bon ange, the little good angel, which is part of a person's soul. Vodou understands the soul as having multiple components: the gros bon ange, the life force that all living things share, and the bon ange, the individual consciousness, the personality, the self. If the bon ange is captured and bottled, stored away in the Bokor's possession, what remains is a shell, a body that breathes and moves but lacks will, lacks selfhood, lacks everything that makes a person who they are. Imagine that loss, but only briefly, only as a passing thought as you drift toward sleep. To exist but not to be yourself. To move through the world but have no control over your actions. To be alive but not living. This is the horror of the zombie, and it is a horror that resonates deeply with the historical experience of slavery itself. Because that is what slavery was in essence. The reductee of human beings to bodies, to labor, to property. The systematic destruction of individual will, of cultural identity, of selfhood. Enslaved people in Haiti worked under conditions of unimaginable brutality on the sugar plantations, dying by the thousands, replaced by new captives stolen from Africa in an endless horrific cycle. They were treated as zombies in all but name, as bodies without rights, without recognition as full human beings forced to work until they died. The night air in Haiti is warm and heavy, pressing down like a blanket, like history itself. Let it cover you gently as you sink deeper. The zombie tradition emerged from this trauma, from this collective experience of dehumanization. It was a way of naming the worst fear imaginable, not death itself, but something worse than death. The loss of self, even while the body continues. Death at least offered escape. Death meant joining the ancestors, perhaps returning to Africa in spirit. But zombification offered no release. There are documented cases, stories passed down through generations, of people who claimed to have been made into zombie and then escaped. The most famous is the case of Clervius Narcisse, recorded in 1980. Narcisse claimed he had been poisoned by a Bokor, pronounced dead, buried, then exhumed and forced to work on a sugar plantation for years in a zombified state. When the Bokor died and the spell was allegedly broken, he returned to his village, recognized by family members despite being dead for nearly 2 decades. Scientists and anthropologists have tried to explain such cases. Perhaps the most famous investigation was by Wade Davis, an ethnobotanist who traveled to Haiti in the 1980s searching for the truth behind zombie stories. But we will speak of his work later, in another part of our journey. For now, simply rest in the mystery, in the space between belief and skepticism, between the natural and supernatural. The Bokor in Vodou tradition is both feared and sometimes necessary. In a society where formal justice was often unavailable or corrupt, where the powerful could act with impunity, the Bokor represented a form of ultimate sanction. If someone committed a terrible crime and faced no earthly punishment, the community might turn to a Bokor for justice. The threat of becoming a zombie served as social control, as a way of maintaining order and moral behavior when other systems failed. But this power could also be abused. Bokors might zombify people for profit, creating an enslaved workforce on remote plantations. They might do it for revenge, for payment from enemies, or simply to demonstrate their power. The zombie tradition thus reflects not just the trauma of slavery but the complexity of power, resistance, and survival in a society built on profound injustice. Listen to the drums in the distance, that steady heartbeat rhythm. In Vodou ceremonies, drums call the LWA. Invite them to possess the dancers, to ride them like horses. possession, in Vodou is not evil, not harmful. It is sacred communication, a moment when the divine enters the human. But zombification is possession's dark mirror. Instead of a LWA entering a willing body to share wisdom and blessing, the T-I-Bonange is forcibly removed, leaving only emptiness, only the shell that can be controlled and exploited. The night deepens around you, warm and dark, but you are safe here, safe in this moment, drifting between waking and sleep. The zonbi walks in Haiti's history and folklore, but not in your reality, not in your present. Yet the fear the zonbi represents is real and universal. The fear of losing control, of losing yourself, of being trapped in a life you cannot escape. These are fears that transcend culture, that speak to something fundamental in human experience.
In Vodou tradition, there are protections against zombification.
Salt is believed to restore a zombi's awareness, which is why zombie are supposedly given only bland, saltless food. Speaking their AME, particularly their true name, can awaken their consciousness, and proper burial, with the right rituals, can protect the dead from being raised. Some families in Haiti still place heavy stones on graves, or bury the body face down, or take other precautions, just as the Vikings did with potential Draugr, separated by ocean and culture, but united in the desire to keep the dead at rest. There are also stories of zonbi who were freed, who tasted salt and suddenly remembered who they were, who were called by name and woke as if from a long nightmare. These stories offer hope, suggest that selfhood, once lost, might be recovered, that the soul, even when stolen, yearns to return, that identity, even when suppressed, remains somehow intact, waiting for the right word, the right taste, the right moment to resurface. Breathe deeply now, feeling your own identity solid and present, your consciousness your own, your will undiminished. You are yourself, fully and completely, safe in this mom. Safe in this place. The warm Haitian night cannot touch you here. The Bokor has no power across time and distance. The zonbi is story, is history, is symbol, but not present reality. The palm fronds continue their endless rustle, that soft sound like whispered secrets. In Haiti today, Vodou is recognized as an official religion, practiced openly alongside Catholicism and other faiths. The zombie remains part of the culture, part of the folklore, but more as cautionary tale than present fear. The trauma that gave birth to the zombie tradition, slavery, colonialism, brutal exploitation, has left deep scars, but Haiti endures, its culture rich and complex, its people resilient beyond measure. As you drift past this darkness into safety, past the heavy history, past the weight of suffering and fear, let yourself feel gratitude for your freedom, for your selfhood, for the simple fact of being yourself in this moment. The zombie tradition reminds us how precious this is, how fundamental, how easily it might be lost under certain circumstances. But it also reminds us of the human capacity for resistance, for maintaining identity even under impossible conditions, for creating meaning and community even in the midst of horror. The night in Haiti is warm and heavy, thick with humidity and history, but also with life, with music, with the constant renewal of culture and spirit. The drums continue in the distance, calling the LWA, celebrating survival, affirming connection between past and present, between the living and the ancestors, between the human and the divine. This is not the realm of zombies but of resilience, not of loss but of profound spiritual richness. Let yourself drift now, drift like a seed on the warm Caribbean breeze, past the pain and into peace, past the fear and into rest. The zombie walks in history but not in your dreams. Your soul remains your own, whole and undiminished, carrying you gently down into sleep as natural and complete as breathing, as in, inevitable and peaceful as the tide returning to shore. The palm fronds rustle their lullaby, the moon shines silver on the waves, and you yourself, entirely yourself, sink at last into deep and dreamless sleep, where no Bokor can reach, where no magic can touch, where you are safe and whole and free. The church bells toll softly across medieval Europe, their bronze voices carrying over cobblestone streets and thatched roofs, over fields and forests, marking the hours of prayer and the passages of life and death. Listen to them now, those distant bells, as we drift backward through time once more, leaving the warm Caribbean night behind, traveling across the Atlantic to a very different darkness. We're going to medieval Europe, to the centuries before science explained the world, when the church held both spiritual and temporal power, when death was ever present and the boundary between the living and the dead seemed dangerously thin. Breathe slowly, deeply, as we settle into this time and place. The air here is different from Haiti, cooler, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp stone, of incense from church services and the less pleasant smells of medieval life. This is a world of small villages clustered around churches, of walled cities where people live pressed close together, of monasteries where monks copy manuscripts by candlelight, preserving knowledge through the long centuries sometimes called the Dark Ages, though they were not as dark as often imagined. In the 1600s, though medieval times had officially ended, the fears remained, the beliefs persisted, particularly in rural areas where old ways died slowly. People feared the revenant, the one who returns. Let that word settle into your mind as you sink deeper toward sleep. Revenant, from the Latin revenire, to come back. The dead who would not stay dead, who clawed their way from their graves, who walked again among the living with terrible purpose. Close your eyes and picture a village in the countryside. Somewhere in Eastern Europe perhaps, or in the British Isles, or in the Germanic lands. It is late autumn, the harvest gathered in, the days growing short, frost touching the ground each morning. The village is small, perhaps 20 families, their lives governed by the seasons and the church calendar, by planting and harvest, by saints' days and holy days. Everyone knows everyone, secrets are impossible, and when someone dies, the entire community is affected. Not all dead stayed peacefully in consecrated ground. This was the fear that kept people awake at night, that made them check their doors and windows, that made them clutch their rosaries and whisper prayers. The church taught that the righteous dead slept in their graves, awaiting resurrection on Judgment Day. Their bodies, blessed and buried in holy ground, rested in peace. But what of those who died badly? What of those who died suddenly, without the last rites, without confession, their sins still heavy upon their souls? Your breathing is steady now, rhythmic and calm. Feel yourself sinking like a body being lowered into the earth, but safely, peacefully, knowing you will rise again. Those who died badly, murdered, executed, drowned, killed in accidents, these were at risk of becoming revenants. Those who died with unfinished business, with wrongs unavenged, with promises unkept, they too might return. Suicides, excommunicates, those who died in mortal sin, all of these posed dangers. The church refused them burial in consecrated ground, interring them instead at Crossroads or beyond the walls of the cemetery, acknowledging that they were different, dangerous, unpredictable. The Revenant stories are remarkably consistent across medieval Europe, recorded by monks and chroniclers, who documented these accounts with the same seriousness they brought to recording battles and coronations. The Revenant would rise from its grave, often appearing much as it did in life, and would haunt specific people, usually family members or those who had wronged it. Sometimes the Revenant sought vengeance, sometimes it sought resolution of earthly affairs. Sometimes it seemed driven by nothing more than restless energy, unable to accept the finality of death. Picture now a chronicler, a monk in his scriptorium, bent over parchment by candlelight, his careful handwriting recording an account given to him by frightened villagers. He writes of a man who died and was properly buried, but who began appearing at night, knocking on doors, calling out the names of family members. Those who answered his call would sicken and die within days. The village lived in terror, no one sleeping soundly, everyone jumping at shadows. Finally, the community decided to act. Let your body relax completely now as we observe what came next, knowing this is history, only history, the fears of people who did not understand what we understand. The village council, with the blessing of the local priest, decided to exhume the body. Was not done lightly. Not done casually. The dead were sacred, their resting places inviolable under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances. These were times of crisis, when the usual rules had to be suspended for the greater good. They opened the grave, these frightened but determined villagers, and what they found seemed to confirm their worst fears. The body was fresh, not decomposed as it should have been after weeks or months in the ground. The face was flushed as if with blood, The eyes appeared open. When they cut the body, blood flowed. Dark, thick blood that seemed impossible in a corpse. The nails and hair appeared to have grown. The body seemed swollen, larger than it had been in life. Rest easy now, knowing what they did not know. These signs, so terrifying to medieval people, have simple scientific explanations. Bodies decompose at different rates depending on soil conditions, temperature, moisture. In cold, dry conditions, bodies can mummify, preserving for months or even years. The fresh appearance might simply be normal preservation. The blood was likely decomposition fluids, dark and viscous, that pooled and could leak when the body was disturbed. The swelling was bloating from bacterial gases produced during decay. The growth of hair and nails was actually the skin retracting as it dried, making these features appear longer. But they did not know this, these medieval villagers. They saw only confirmation of their fears, evidence that this corpse was unnatural, dangerous, that it had indeed been rising from its grave to plague the living. And so they took action. Terrible action born of terror and desperation. They would pin bodies down, driving stakes through the chest to fix the corpse to the earth. They would place heavy stones in the mouth, believing this prevented the revenant from biting or calling out. They would cut off the head, severing it from the body so it could not rise and walk. Your breath is so slow now, so peaceful, as far from panic as those villagers were close to it. Sometimes they would turn the body face down in the grave, believing that if it tried to dig out, it would dig deeper instead of up. The same practice the Vikings used with potential Draugr. Sometimes they would burn the heart, reducing it to ashes that could be mixed with water and given to the sick to drink as a cure. Sometimes they would burn the entire body, scattering the ashes, ensuring that nothing remained that could return. All this fear, all this effort, all this violation of the dead's rest. And it was based on misunderstanding, on the terror that comes from ignorance, on the human tendency to see patterns where none exist, to find supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. When the hauntings stopped after a body was exhumed and destroyed, people believed their actions had worked. But likely the hauntings stopped because the panic exhausted itself, because the community had taken action and could find all. Or rest, because the sick who were going to die had died, and the survivors' immune systems overcame whatever illness had been spreading through the village. The church's position on revenants was complicated, shifting over the centuries. Officially, the church taught that the dead could not return in their bodies. That was heresy, a denial of divine order. The dead awaited resurrection, their souls either in heaven, hell, or purgatory. What appeared to be a revenant, the church argued, was either a demon taking the form of the deceased or a hallucination sent by the devil to disturb the faithful. But locally, parish priests often participated in or blessed the exhumations and destructions of suspected revenants, acknowledging the reality their parishioners experienced, even if the theological explanation remained murky. Listen to those church bells again, tolling for vespers, marking the end of day and the approach of night. In the villages, people would hurry home before full dark. Woe. Would bar their doors, would gather by firesides for protection and comfort. The night was dangerous, filled with things that might or might not be real, with revenants and demons, with wolves and robbers, with all the unnamed fears that darkness brings. But morning always came. The bells tolled matins, calling the faithful to prayer, and the night terrors faded in daylight's rationality. The revenant tradition influenced vampire folklore, which emerged more fully in the 18th century, particularly in Eastern Europe. The vampire shared many characteristics with the revenant: the refusal to decay, the need to restrain or destroy the body, the danger to family and community. But the vampire added new elements: the drinking of blood made explicit and central, the aristocratic seductiveness, the transformation into a kind of immortal predator. The revenant was usually a tragic figure, a victim of bad death or unfinished business. The vampire became something darker, more deliberately evil, more predatory. But tonight we're concerned with the simpler, older revenant, the medieval dead who simply would not stay buried. Let yourself feel sympathy for them now, for those medieval people so frightened by what they saw, so desperate to protect their families and communities, that they would violate graves and mutilate corpses. They were not evil. They were not even unusually superstitious for their time. They were simply people trying to make sense of a world that often made no sense, trying to survive in an age when death was always close, when disease could sweep through a village in weeks, when winter could mean starvation, when childbirth killed mothers and babies with terrible regularity. The natural processes of decay were mysterious to them. Bacteria and decomposition, bloating and putrefaction, these were not understood in terms of biology and chemistry, but in terms of corruption and unnaturalness. When a body did not decompose as expected, and bodies in certain conditions really can remain preserved for shocking lengths of time, it seemed like evidence of supernatural interference. When illness spread through a village after someone died, it seemed like the dead person was somehow responsible. Rather than understanding that whatever killed them might also kill others, that disease spreads through contact and contamination. Rest easy now, sinking deeper, knowing they were wrong. The dead cannot return. The revenant was never real, only feared. The bodies in those graves were truly dead, their seeming freshness only an accident of chemistry and environment, their apparent blood only the ordinary fluids of decomposition. The hauntings were grief and guilt, fear and disease, the mind's tendency to see what it expects to see, the community's need to act, to do something, anything, in the face of inexplicable loss. Modern archaeology has found these mutilated burials, confirming what the chronicles describe. Bodies with stakes through them, with heads severed and placed between the legs, with stones in mouths, with clear evidence of post-mortem interference. These graves tell us that the fear was real, even if the revenants were not. They tell us of communities, pushed to extremes, of people so frightened they would commit acts they must have known were horrible, disturbing the dead's rest in the desperate hope of protecting the living. The church bells toll once more, softer now, more distant, as if centuries are passing with each note. Medieval Europe fades like a dream upon waking, those fears becoming history, those beliefs becoming folklore, those practices becoming archaeological curiosities. We know better now. We understand decomposition. We understand disease. We understand that the dead, whatever awaits them in the mystery beyond death, do not rise and walk again in their earthly bodies. Let yourself drift past all that medieval fear, past all that darkness and desperation, into the safety of the present, the comfort of knowledge, the peace of understanding. The revenants never were. The bodies in those graves were always only bodies. Never threats, never dangers, never truly capable of return. Those medieval people lived in a harder world than ours, closer to death, more familiar with loss, and they did what they thought necessary to survive. We can forgive them their fears, we can understand their actions, and we can rest easy, knowing they were wrong. The bells have stopped now. Night has fallen across medieval Europe, but it is a night 7 centuries past, a darkness that is already lifted with countless dawns. You are here now, safe in the present, where the dead rest peacefully in their graves, where science explains what once seemed supernatural, where you can close your eyes without fear of revenants, without dread of the returning dead, and sink into sleep as natural and necessary as breathing, as innocent and restorative as a child's slumber, as peaceful and complete as the sleep of the truly dead, who neither know nor care about the world of the living they have left behind. Let the warm Caribbean breeze wash over you now, gentle and constant, carrying salt spray and the perfume of flowering trees, the scent of earth after rain and the sweetness of ripening fruit. Feel it against your skin, warm as breath, soft as silk, as we drift away from the cold stones and church bells of medieval Europe towards something entirely different. We're traveling to the Caribbean, to that scattered necklace of islands strung across the turquoise sea, where history flowed together like rivers meeting, where cultures collided and merged, where beliefs blended like watercolors bleeding into one another on wet paper, creating something new, something no one could have predicted. Breathe deeply and let yourself arrive here, in this place of endless summer, where the sun burns bright and fierce during the day but yields each evening to a sky full of stars so numerous they seem impossible, a river of light flowing overhead. The air is thick with humidity, heavy with moisture that makes everything grow wild and lush. Palm trees lean at angles sculpted by hurricane winds, vines climb everything. The earth itself seems alive, fecund, overwhelming in its fertility and its decay happening simultaneously, growth and rot occurring side by side in the tropical heat. This is where the zombie emerged, not as a single tradition, but as a convergence, a meeting place of three worlds that had never meant to meet. Close your eyes and picture this convergence, gentle as the meeting of waves, though the history behind it was anything but gentle. The Caribbean became a crossroads not by choice but by force, by the violence of colonization, by the horror of the transatlantic slave trade, by the near-total destruction of indigenous populations. But from this terrible crucible, new cultures were born, including new beliefs about death, about souls, about the boundaries between the living and the dead. Let your body sink deeper into comfort as we explore these three streams that flowed together. First, the indigenous beliefs, the original spiritual traditions of the Taino, the Carib, the Arawak peoples who lived on these islands for thousands of years before European ships appeared on the horizon. These were people who understood the land and sea intimately, who knew every plant and animal, who saw the sacred in the natural world, who believed that spirits inhabited everything, the trees and rocks, the rivers and mountains, the storms and the calm. The Taino called spirits Zemi, and they Cree, aided representations of them in wood and stone and cotton, housing them in temples and treating them with reverence. They believed in an afterlife located in a place called Koibe, where the dead went and could occasionally return to visit the living at night. The souls of ancestors were present and active, capable of influencing the world, deserving respect and offerings. Death was not an ending but a transformation, a passage into a different kind of existence that remained connected to the living world. Your breathing is slow and steady now, like the gentle lap of waves against the shore. But the indigenous populations were devastated by European contact, by diseases they had no immunity to, by enslavement and violence, by the destruction of their societies. Within a century of Columbus's arrival, the indigenous populations of many Caribbean islands had been reduced to a fraction of their former numbers. Their beliefs went underground, mixed with other traditions, survived in fragm. Ents and echoes rather than as intact systems. But they contributed to the spiritual landscape, to the sense that the natural and supernatural worlds were interwoven, that the dead could affect the living, that spirits walked alongside people in the night. The second stream was European, primarily Spanish and French, bringing Catholic Christianity, with its own rich tradition of death rituals and beliefs. The Catholics brought saints who interceded for the living, blessed spaces that protected against evil, holy water and crucifixes and prayers that could bind or banish spirits. They brought the concept of consecrated ground, of proper burial, of the resurrection of the body on Judgment Day. They brought fears of the devil and demons, of possession and damnation, of souls that might be lost if the proper rituals were not observed. But European Christianity in the Caribbean was complicated by the institution of slavery. The colonizers used Christianity to justify their brutality, claiming they were saving souls even as they destroyed bodies. Enslaved Africans were baptized, sometimes en masse, with little regard for whether they understood or believed the theology. Churches were built on the islands. Priests conducted services, but the Christianity that took root was shaped by its context, by the hypocrisy of masters who preached love and practiced cruelty, by enslaved people who adopted the religion but adapted it to their needs and understandings. Now the third stream, the most significant for our story. Feel yourself drifting as if carried on this current, the vast river of stolen people, the millions of Africans torn from their homes and brought in chains across the Atlantic in conditions of unspeakable horror. They came from many different regions, many different ethnic groups, speaking different languages, practicing different religions. From the Yoruba and Igbo, from the Fon and Yu, from the Congo and Angola, from cultures as diverse and complex as any in Euro, PE or Asia, with their own philosophies, theologies, arts, and sciences. These enslaved people brought their beliefs with them because beliefs were what couldn't be taken away. You could chain the body but not the soul. You could forbid the language but not the thoughts. You could destroy the physical manifestations of religion, the shrines and sacred objects, but not the knowledge of how to honor the spirits, how to call upon the ancestors, how to survive with dignity and resistance in a world designed to break you. In the Caribbean, particularly in Haiti but also in Cuba, Jamaica, Trinidad, and other islands, African spiritual traditions not only survived but evolved and strengthened. The African understanding of the soul was complex and multi-layered. Many West African traditions saw the soul as having multiple components, not a single indivisible essence, but a composite of different spiritual elements. The Vodou tradition that developed in Haiti inherited this understanding, distinguishing between different aspects of the soul. The gros bon ange and petit bon ange we spoke of earlier, the life force and the personal consciousness. This multiplicity meant that death was not simple, that different parts of a person might have different fates, that the soul could potentially be fragmented or captured. Let the warm breeze wash over you again, carrying with it the sound of drums in the distance, that pulse that connects past and present, Africa and the Americas, the living and the dead. In the sugarcane fields under tropical stars, under moons that waxed and waned with the same indifference they showed over Africa, enslaved people worked until their bodies gave out. The mortality rate on Caribbean sugar plantations was staggering. People died young, worked to death in their 20s and 30s, their bodies quite literally consumed by the plantation system. And in these fields, in the quarters where enslaved people lived in the few hours they weren't working, stories were, he whispered. Stories of the living dead forced to work eternally, of bodies without souls laboring in the fields at night, of the ultimate horror, that even death might not bring escape from slavery. The zonbi, emerged from this crucible as the perfect symbol of plantation slavery itself. The reduction of human beings to bodies, to labor, to tools that could be worked until they broke and then replaced. Your breath is deep and peaceful now, and these stories carry the weight of real suffering, transmuted into folklore. The zombie tradition was born from trauma, from the daily experience of dehumanization, from seeing friends and family literally work to death, from the fear that this might be all there was, that there was no escape even in death. It was a way of naming the horror, of giving form to the formless dread of total powerlessness. But the zombie tradition was also resistance. By naming the fear, enslaved people claimed it, controlled it, incorporated it into a ritual framework that also offered protection and power. Vodou wasn't just about zombies and bokors. It was primarily about healing, community, connection to ancestors, resistance through culture. The same bokor who could supposedly create zombies was also a healer who knew herbs and roots, who could cure illness, who could provide spiritual counsel. The same Vodou ceremonies that acknowledged the existence of zombies also celebrated the LWA, invoked protection, created community solidarity that helped people survive impossible conditions. The waves lap gently at the shore, steady and eternal, and you can hear them now as you drift deeper towards sleep. The Caribbean itself became a kind of third culture, neither African nor European nor indigenous, but all three and more. A Creole synthesis that created new languages, new foods, new music, new religions. The zombie emerged from this synthesis, pulling elements from all three traditions that met in these islands, from African traditions. The understanding of the soul as something that could be manipulated, the knowledge of herbs and poisons, the role of spiritual practitioners with power over life and death, the importance of proper burial and ancestor veneration, from indigenous traditions, the sense of spirits in the natural world, the belief in communication between living and dead, the knowledge of local plants and their properties, the understanding that the boundary between natural and supernatural was permeable. From European traditions, the language of devils and demons, the concept of consecrated ground, the fear of improper burial, the anxiety about control and order, the religious framework that was imposed but then adapted, and from the specific context of slavery, the reduction of people to bodies, the trauma of total powerlessness, the daily experience of dehumanization, the desperate need for spiritual resources to resist and survive, the transformation of African traditions in response to new and horrible circumstances. Picture the sugar cane fields now, silver in starlight, rose stretching to the horizon, rustling in the breeze. The cane grows tall, taller than a person, and in its depths, shadows move. Are they workers? Are they memories? Are they stories given form by belief and fear? In the folklore, zombies were said to work these fields at night, tireless and uncomplaining, while the living slept. They were the nightmare version of the day's reality, slavery extending beyond the grave, no escape even in death. These stories carried the weight of real suffering, but they also carried resistance. To speak of zombies was to acknowledge the horror of what was being done, to name it, to refuse the lie that slavery was natural or acceptable or anything other than a profound violation of human dignity. The zombie tradition said, "This is what you are doing to us, this is what you would make of us, this is the logical endpoint of treating people as property." It was accusation disguised. D is folklore, testimony disguised as superstition. Let yourself drift on these warm Caribbean waters now, carried by currents of history toward the present. The plantation system that gave birth to the zombie tradition is gone, abolished after centuries of resistance and rebellion, after the Haitian Revolution that established the first free black republic in the Americas, after abolition spread slowly, too slowly, through the Caribbean islands. The physical structures remain: ruined great houses, old sugar mills, the roads that once moved harvested cane to ports. But the system is dead, and its dead cannot return, except as history, as memory, as cautionary tale. The zombie tradition remains, transformed again, carried from the Caribbean to the world through migration and media, through movies and books, through cultural exchange. But in its home, in the islands where it was born, it retains its original meaning for those who understand its history. It is not just a horror trope, but a symbol of resistance, a testament to survival, a reminder of what human beings endured and how they maintained their humanity, even when everything was designed to destroy it. The breeze continues, warm and gentle, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers now, jasmine and frangipani, sweet and heavy on the humid air. The stars overhead are the same stars that look down on the Middle Passage, on the plantations, on the rebellions and revolutions. They witnessed everything and remember nothing, indifferent to human suffering and human triumph alike. But we remember. The stories remember. The folklore remembers, encoding history and myth, preserving testimony and tradition. Rest now in this warm Caribbean night, safe in the knowledge that you are yourself, whole and free, that the horrors that created the zombie tradition are past, that while their legacy remains in structural inequalities and historical trauma, the physical chains are broken, the plantations are ruins, and the people who survived and resisted created vibrant cultures that endure and flourish. The zombie emerged from the Caribbean's cultural crossroads, from that terrible meeting of three worlds, but so did extraordinary music, food, art, literature, spiritual traditions, and communities of remarkable resilience and creativity. The waves lap gently at the shore, steady as breath, eternal as time, and you can let them carry you now into sleep, into peace, into the gentle darkness where no zombies walk, where no chains bind, where the only work is the work of dreaming, and even that is voluntary, and you can wake whenever you wish, free as the wind that moves the palm trees, free as the birds that ride the updrafts over the turquoise sea, free as every person deserves to be, has always deserved to be, will always deserve to be. Science enters our story like morning light through curtains, gradual and inevitable, illuminating what was hidden, revealing shapes that seemed mysterious in darkness. After C, entries of folklore, of beliefs and fears passed down through generations, after stories told by firelight and whispered in tropical nights, after the zombie had become woven into the cultural fabric of Haiti, someone finally asked a different kind of question. Not whether zombies were real in a supernatural sense, but whether there might be a natural explanation, whether science could account for what tradition had always attributed to magic. Breathe slowly now as we shift from the realm of pure belief into the borderland between folklore and fact, between magic and chemistry. It is the 1980s, and the world is changing rapidly. Computers are becoming common. MTV is transforming music. The Cold War still divides the globe. And in this modern world, a young ethnobotanist named Wade Davis becomes fascinated by a question that most scientists would dismiss as beneath serious consideration. Could there be truth to the zombie stories of Haiti? Not supernatural truth, but biochemical truth. Could the Bokors who claim to create zombies actually possess knowledge of naturally occurring compounds that could simulate death and create suggestibility? Let your body settle deeper into comfort as we follow Wade Davis on his journey. Imagine him, a trained scientist from Harvard, but also someone with deep respect for indigenous knowledge, for traditional practices, for the wisdom encoded in folklore. He understood that just because something was called magic didn't mean it lacked a rational basis. Many modern medicines, after all, came from plants that traditional healers had used for centuries. The line between pharmacology and folk remedy was often just a matter of isolation and testing, of understanding what was already known in a different way. Davis traveled to Haiti at the invitation of a colleague who had heard persistent stories about zonbi powder, a substance that Bokors supposedly used to induce the death-like state necessary for zombification. The colleague had EV and obtained a sample, but needed someone with ethnobotanical training to analyze it, to identify its components, to determine if it could actually do what legend claimed. Davis accepted, drawn by the mystery, by the challenge, by the opportunity to bridge scientific and traditional knowledge. Close your eyes and picture Haiti as Davis would have encountered it. A complex nation with a complicated history, the first Black Republic, born from the only successful slave rebellion in history, but burdened by poverty, political instability, and the weight of its revolutionary past. Port-au-Prince, the capital, dense and vibrant, full of color and noise and life. The countryside, rural and poor, where Vodou remained stronger, where traditional beliefs persisted despite Catholic overlay, where people still spoke of zombies not as folklore but as present danger. Your breathing is steady now, deep and regular, as Davis began his investigation. He didn't approach it as a debunker, someone determined to prove the stories false, nor did he approach it as a believer, ready to accept supernatural explanations. He approached it as a scientist and anthropologist, someone who understood that cultures don't maintain elaborate traditions without reason, that folklore often contains coded knowledge, that what seems impossible might simply be improbable, waiting for the right explanation. Davis met with Bokors, the practitioners of dark magic within Vodou tradition. These were not easy meetings to arrange. Bokors were secretive, feared, operating on the margins of society. They were not eager to share their knowledge with outsiders, particularly foreign scientists who might expose or ridicule them. But Davis had something many researchers lacked: genuine respect for the culture he was studying, a willingness to learn rather than judge, patience to build trust slowly over time, through careful networking. Through intermediaries and gradual relationship building, Davis eventually obtained SA. MPLs of zombie powder from multiple Bokors. The powder varied in composition, but analysis revealed common ingredients. Let your mind drift now through this catalog of components, this mixture of the ordinary and extraordinary, ground glass, to irritate and create wounds. Human remains, bone fragments, adding psychological weight and ritual significance. Various plant materials, some toxic, some not. Dried and ground toads, particularly the cane toad, which contains bufotoxin. And most significantly, carefully prepared pufferfish, specifically the species that contain Tetrodotoxin. Let that word settle into your consciousness as you drift toward sleep. It's one of the most powerful natural toxins known to science, hundreds of times more poisonous than cyanide. Just a few milligrams can kill an adult human. It works by blocking sodium channels in nerve cells, preventing the transmission of electrical signals. The result is progressive paralysis. First the lips and tongue tingle and go numb, then the extremities lose feeling and function, then the trunk and breathing muscles are affected. Eventually the victim appears dead, with no detectable pulse or respiration, the body cool and unresponsive. But consciousness may remain, trapped inside a paralyzed body, aware but unable to move or respond. Picture this state now, but only briefly, only as scientific curiosity, knowing you are safe, that your consciousness is your own, that your body responds to your will. In Japan, where pufferfish, called fugu, is considered a delicacy, chefs train for years to prepare it safely, removing the organs that contain tetrodotoxin, while leaving just enough trace amounts to create a tingling sensation prized by adventurous diners. But mistakes happen. People are poisoned every year. And in severe cases, they experience exactly what Davis proposed the zombie powder could induce, a death-like state, the appearance of death without its reality. Davis's theory, published in his 1985 book The Serpent and the Rainbow, proposed a two-stage process. First, the victim would be poisoned with zombie powder, either administered through wounds created by ground glass or absorbed through skin contact. The tetrodotoxin would create the appearance of death. The victim would be declared dead by family and community, perhaps even by medical personnel unfamiliar with the specific symptoms of tetrodotoxin poisoning. The person would be buried, typically quickly in the Caribbean heat, with a shallow grave as was common. Your breath is so slow now, so peaceful, as we continue through this theory. Within hours or at most a day or two, the Bokor would return with accomplices to exhume the body. If the timing was right, if the dose was right, the victim would still be alive but brain damaged from oxygen deprivation during the period of paralysis and burial. This brain damage, combined with the psychological trauma of being buried alive, would create a suggestible, compliant STA. The Bokor would then administer a paste containing datura, a powerful hallucinogen known as zombie cucumber in Haiti, which would further disorient and control the victim. The result would be someone who appeared to be a zombie, alive but not fully conscious, compliant but without will, moving and working but lacking their former personality. Not supernatural, but a tragic combination of poisoning, trauma, and continued drugging. Davis interviewed Clervius Narcisse, the man who claimed to have been zombified and later recovered, and found his account consistent with this pharmacological explanation. Narcisse described being conscious but paralyzed, aware of his burial but unable to move or cry out, then years of forced labor in a confused, dreamlike state before escaping when the Bokor died and the drugging stopped. Let yourself drift now through the controversy that followed Davis's work. The scientific community was skeptical, and remains so to varying degrees. Subsequent analyses of zombie powder samples found inconsistent amounts of tetrodotoxin, sometimes not enough to cause the proposed effects. Critics argued that the theory was too neat, that it didn't account for all aspects of the zombie tradition, that Davis had been fooled by informants or had allowed his desire for a dramatic explanation to cloud his judgment. But whether Davis's specific theory is fully correct or not, whether tetrodotoxin is the key ingredient, or whether the process is more complex, or whether some cases of supposed zombification have entirely different explanations, his work achieved something important. It showed how zombies bridged folklore and pharmacology, fear and chemistry, cultural belief and biochemical reality. It demonstrated that traditional knowledge, even when expressed in supernatural terms, might contain practical information worth investigating scientifically.
The answer might lie in nature, in compounds in consciousness, in the remarkable toxins that evolution has
produced for defense and predation, in plants and animals that contain chemicals capable of altering human consciousness and physiology in profound ways. Your consciousness drifts now, safely, naturally, not through poison but through the ordinary process of falling asleep. That daily small death that we trust will end in awakening, that suspension of consciousness that we surrender to willingly. Davis's work also highlighted the complexity of the zombie tradition. It wasn't simply folklore or simply pharmacology, but both, intertwined in ways that resist simple categorization. The zombie was a cultural construct, a symbol of slavery and resistance, a tool of social control, and possibly also a real phenomenon with biochemical basis. All of these things could be true simultaneously. The power of the zombie came partly from the powders and potions, but also from belief, from community consensus, from the cultural context that made zombification thinkable and fearsome. Consider the placebo effect, that well-documented phenomenon where believing something will affect you actually makes it affect you. Consider the nocebo effect, its dark mirror, where believing something will harm you actually causes harm. In a community where everyone believed in zombies, where the threat of zombification was taken seriously, where people understood the signs and knew the stories, the psychological impact would be immense. Someone dosed with zombie powder who survived might never fully recover, not just because of brain damage, but because of the overwhelming trauma and the expectation shared by everyone around them that they were now a zombie. Your breathing is slower still, deeper, as consciousness itself becomes the mystery we're exploring. What is consciousness? What is the self? These questions that philosophers have debated for millennia remain incompletely answered even by modern neuroscience. We know consciousness emerges from brain activity, from neurons firing in complex patterns, from networks of cells communicating through chemical and electrical signals. But we don't fully understand how physical processes give rise to subjective experience, to the sense of being someone, to the feeling of existing from the inside. The zombie, whether created by poison or by supernatural means, represented the loss of this consciousness, this selfhood. And perhaps that's why the zombie tradition has such power, such persistence across cultures and centuries. It touches on our deepest fear, not death itself, but the loss of self while still technically alive. Being reduced to a body without consciousness, to a thing that moves and responds but doesn't truly experience, doesn't truly exist, as a subject, as a person, as an I. Let yourself feel grateful now for your consciousness, for your sense of self, for the simple fact of being you, aware and present in this moment.
Davis's investigation into zombie powder and tetrodotoxin was really an investigation into the bounder.
Eyes of consciousness, into how fragile our sense of self might be, how dependent on chemistry and biology, how easily disrupted if the right or wrong compounds affect our nervous system. The pufferfish that contains tetrodotoxin doesn't produce it themselves but accumulate it from bacteria in their diet, concentrating it in their organs. The poison exists not to create zombies but as a defense against predators, an evolutionary strategy that has nothing to do with human fears or folklore. Yet humans discovered this poison, learned to use it, incorporated it into practices both culinary and possibly magical. Nature provides the compounds. Humans provide the meanings, the uses, the stories that grow up around them. Rest now in the knowledge that science and folklore need not be enemies but can inform each other. That traditional knowledge often contains truths that science can validate and explain, that mysteries can have answers that make them no less mysterious, no less profound. Wade, Davis's work, controversial though it remains, opened a door between worlds, between the laboratory and the Vodou temple, between chemistry and culture, between what we can measure and what we believe. Your consciousness drifts now, safely, naturally, not through any powder or poison but through the ordinary magic of sleep, that alteration of consciousness that happens every night, that temporary diminishment of awareness that we trust will reverse with morning. You are not a zombie but a person choosing rest, not losing consciousness but changing its mode, not becoming less but preparing to become more when you wake refreshed and restored. The morning light through curtains that began this section grows brighter now in your imagination, but instead of waking you, it soothes you deeper into sleep, soft and warm, illuminating without demanding attention. Science has entered the story of zombies, but the story continues, enriched rather than ended, complicated rather than solved. And you continue too, drifting through your own story, through this night toward tomorrow, through consciousness toward dreams, through waking toward rest, as natural and necessary as tides, as regular as breath, as certain as the sun that sets and rises, and will rise again. Flicker of black and white film, the stutter and jump of images projected on a screen, that peculiar quality of old movies that makes them seem like windows into a dream, a memory, something not quite real but more vivid than reality. It is 1968, and the world is convulsing with change. The Vietnam War rages in jungles half a world away, broadcast nightly into American living rooms. The civil rights movement transforms the nation through courage and sacrifice. Students protest on campuses, cities burn, assassinations shock the country. Martin Luther King Jr. in April, Robert Kennedy in June. Everything that seemed solid is shaking. Everything that seemed certain is questioned. And in this year of upheaval, ND transformation, a young filmmaker named George Romero, working with a tiny budget and a crew of friends in Pittsburgh, creates something that will change horror cinema forever. Night of the Living Dead. Let those words settle into your mind as you drift deeper toward sleep. A simple title, direct and ominous, describing exactly what the film delivers. A single night when the dead rise and walk, when the natural order collapses, when nowhere is safe and everyone is threatened. Breathe slowly now, and picture a movie theater in 1968, the lights dimming, that anticipatory hush falling over the audience as the projector begins its work. The screen flickers to life with images in black and white, grainy and immediate, almost documentary-like in their stark realism. No color, no polish, no Hollywood gloss. This is rough, immediate, visceral cinema that feels dangerous in ways that studio horror films never did. The audience doesn't know it yet, but they're about to experience something eerily new, a transformation of the zombie from folklore and Vodou tradition into something modern, something that speaks directly to contemporary anxieties. The film opens with a car driving through the Pennsylvania countryside, a brother and sister visiting their father's grave. Ordinary people, ordinary day. But something is wrong. A strange man approaches, shambling, moving oddly. He attacks. The brother is killed, the sister flees to an abandoned farmhouse. More of these strange people appear, surrounding the house, trying to get in. And gradually, through radio and television reports playing in the background, the characters and audience learn what's happening. The dead are returning to life, attacking and eating the living, and those killed by them are rising to join their ranks. Your eyelids are heavy now, heavy as the dread that builds throughout Romero's film.
But notice what he did. Notice how he transformed the zombie. In Haitian tradition, the zombie was individual, specific,
Created deliberately by a bokor for a purpose, retaining some connection to their former identity. In medieval European folklore, the revenant returned for a reason, driven by unfinished business or improper burial. Even the Draugr had personality, memory, individual motivation. But Romero's zombies are different. They are a mass, a horde, a plague. They have no names, no histories, no individual characteristics that matter. They are defined only by what they do. They shamble, they pursue, they consume. This was revolutionary, though Romero himself didn't realize initially how influential it would become. He wasn't trying to reference Haitian Vodou or any existing zombie tradition. In fact, he never called them zombies in the film. They were just those things or the dead. It was audiences and critics who applied the zombie label, connecting Romero's ghouls to existing folklore, creating a bridge between traditional zombies and this new conception. And the connection stuck. Transfor. The meaning of zombie forever in popular culture. Let your body sink deeper as we explore what Romero's zombies meant, what they represented. On the surface, Night of the Living Dead is about survival, about a group of people trapped in a farmhouse, trying to work together to survive the night, making a series of increasingly desperate decisions as the situation worsens. But beneath the surface, the film is about much more. It's about the breakdown of social order, about how quickly civilization can collapse, about how the real danger might not be the monsters outside but the conflicts and failures among the living. The characters in the farmhouse fight not just the zombies but each other. They argue about whether to board themselves into the cellar or defend the upstairs. They struggle with questions of authority and leadership. Race becomes a factor. The hero is a black man played by Dwayne Jones, at a time when black heroes in American film were extremely rare, and his authority is constantly questioned by a white character who ultimately causes catastrophe. Gender roles are examined and exploded, and in the end, after surviving the entire night, after defeating the zombies through courage and resourcefulness, the hero is shot by a posse of armed white men who mistake him for a zombie. The final images are deliberate, horrifying. The hero's body dragged with meat hooks, thrown onto a pyre, treated exactly like the zombies he fought against all night. Your breath is steady now, deep and regular, as we sit with this darkness. Romero created a horror film, but he also created social commentary, political allegory, a mirror held up to American society in 1968. The zombies became a metaphor, flexible and powerful, capable of representing whatever fears seemed most pressing. In Night of the Living Dead they might present conformity, the masses who follow without thinking, who consume without consideration. They might represent the war dead, the thousands of young men dying in Vietnam, coming home in body bags while the nation watched it all on television. They might represent the death of the American dream, of prosperity and safety and certainty. Picture those shambling figures now, moving slowly but inexorably, never stopping, never tiring, never reasoning or negotiating or showing mercy. They are relentless, and this relentlessness is terrifying in a way that individual monsters are not. You can potentially outsmart a single vampire or werewolf, can appeal to whatever humanity remains, but a horde of zombies cannot be reasoned with, cannot be dissuaded, can only be escaped or destroyed. And they keep coming, and coming, and coming, until eventually the defenses fail, the ammunition runs out, the survivor's strength gives way. This is why Romero's zombie apocalypse resonated so powerfully, and why it persists today, copied and reimagined in countless films, television shows, books, and games. It speaks to a particular modern anxiety, Not about individual death, which has always been with us, but about systemic collapse, about the failure of the structures we depend on, about being overwhelmed by forces too large and numerous to fight. In our interconnected modern world, where we depend on supply chains and infrastructure, on electricity and internet and global trade, the zombie horde represents the collapse of all these systems, the revelation that civilization is more fragile than we believe. Let yourself drift now through Romero's subsequent zombie films, each one deepening the metaphor. Dawn of the Dead in 1978, set in a shopping mall, transformed zombies into commentary on consumerism. The undead mindlessly return to the mall, the place they frequented in life, shambling through familiar spaces on instinct, drawn to the temple of consumption, even when consumption no longer means anything. The living survivors, meanwhile, hole up in the mall, surrounded by everything they could want. All the consumer goods of American plenty, but trapped, isolated, their material wealth meaningless in the face of the horde pressing against the doors. Day of the Dead in 1985 explored military authoritarianism and scientific hubris, with survivors divided between soldiers who want to use force and scientists who try to understand and perhaps domesticate the zombies. Land of the Dead in 2005 showed zombie society developing primitive communication and organization, while human society had stratified into rich and poor, safe and endangered, with the wealthy living in literal towers above the suffering masses. Each film used zombies to comment on contemporary issues, to hold up that mirror and force audiences to see themselves reflected in the shambling dead. Your consciousness drifts now safely, naturally, as we approach the heart of what Romero did. He gave us permission to fear ourselves, our neighbors, our society. The zombies in his films are terrifying, yes, but the humans are often worse, more selfish, more violent, more dangerous. The zombies are simple, following base instinct, but the humans make choices, bad choices, selfish choices, choices driven by prejudice or fear or pride. The real horror in Romero's films is not the undead outside but the living inside, failing each other when cooperation is the only path to survival. This is a darker vision than traditional zombie lore. In Haitian tradition, the zombie was tragedy, a victim of malicious magic. In medieval Europe, the revenant sought resolution could potentially be laid to rest. But in Romero's vision, there is no resolution, no laying to rest, no magical cure. The zombies simply are, a fact of existence like weather or gravity, and humanity must adapt or die. And often humanity chooses to die, torn apart by internal conflicts while the external threat waits patiently outside. But you're safe here, in this quiet moment before sleep. This is only story, only shadow, only images projected on screens decades ago. The zombies Romero created are metaphor, not reality. They walk through celluloid and pixels, through the imagination, through the collective unconscious of a culture working through its fears and anxieties. They are powerful because they are flexible, because each generation can project onto them whatever threatens the social fabric, whatever seems poised to overwhelm us, whatever we fear might consume us if we don't remain vigilant. The modern zombie apocalypse was born in these grainy images, in that low-budget film shot in Pennsylvania in 1968, and it grew to become one of the dominant narratives of contemporary horror and science fiction. Books, films, television shows, video games, zombies are everywhere now, so common they border on cliché. The Walking Dead, World War Z, 28 Days Later, Shaun of the Dead, Zombieland, Resident Evil, Left 4 Dead, countless others. Each one a variation on Romero's theme, each one finding new angles and meanings, each on using zombies to explore whatever anxieties seem most pressing to its creators and audience. Some zombie stories are about pandemic and disease, the dead rising because of a virus, reflecting fears about global health crises, about contagion spreading faster than we can contain it. Some are about environmental collapse, about nuclear radiation or toxic chemicals or corporate negligence creating the undead. Some are about mysterious cosmic causes, radiation from space, or some unknown force beyond human comprehension. The cause varies, but the result remains constant. Social collapse, the breakdown of order, humans struggling to survive against overwhelming odds. And yet, zombie stories are also strangely comforting, in their way. Let this comfort wash over you now as you drift deeper. Zombie apocalypse narratives are really about community, about finding the people you can trust, about working together against a common threat. They're about discovering your own competence, your own cow, Rage, your own value in crisis. They simplify moral choices. The zombies are clear enemies, uncomplicated, and deserving no guilt or mercy. They create scenarios where ordinary people become heroes, where skills that seemed trivial before become crucial for survival. There's a reason zombie apocalypse fiction exploded in popularity in the early 21st century, particularly after 9/11, after the 2008 financial crisis, after each successive blow to the sense of stability and security. When the real world feels overwhelming and complex, when problems seem systemic and solutions impossibly complicated, zombie stories offer clarity. The threat is obvious. The goal is simple: survive. The methods are straightforward, even if difficult. There's a strange relief in imagining disaster, in mentally preparing for the worst, in fantasizing about how you would handle complete societal collapse. But this is only fantasy, only story, only the shadows that flicker on screens in an imagination. Rest easy, K. Knowing that zombies are not real, have never been real in the way Romero envisioned them. The dead do not rise and walk. Civilization, for all its problems and fragilities, continues. The systems we depend on, while imperfect, largely function. The collapse we imagine and prepare for in zombie fiction, remains imagination, remains safely contained in stories we can close, games we can quit, films that end and release us back into the ordinary world. Only sleep approaching now, that gentle darkness that is not death but rest, not ending but intermission, not collapse but renewal. Romero's zombies shamble through the landscape of our collective imagination, but they cannot reach you here, cannot touch this moment of peace and safety. You are not trapped in a farmhouse or mall or prison. You are simply lying down to sleep, surrendering consciousness temporarily and voluntarily, trusting that morning will come and restore you, that this nightly small death will end in resurrection, as it has every night of your life, as it will again tomorrow night and the night after. The flicker of black and white film continues somewhere, those images forever preserved, forever shambling across screens whenever someone chooses to watch. But you need not watch now. You can close your eyes and let the images fade. Let the zombies return to the realm of story and metaphor where they belong. Let Romero's dark vision remain what it always was. Art, commentary, reflection, but not reality. Only sleep now, only rest, only the quiet darkness where no zombies walk, where no hordes approach, where you are safe and whole in yourself, drifting peacefully away from all fears, all anxieties, all apocalypses, into the simple, profound peace of sleep. And finally, rest here in understanding, in this place of completion and peace, where our long journey through zombie history comes full circle. We have traveled from ancient Mesopotamia to medieval Europe, from the Caribbean to modern cinema, through 5,000 years of human fear and fascination with the dead who will not stay dead. And what have we learned? That the zombie endures, persists, adapts, transforms, always relevant, never quite disappearing, shapeshifting to match whatever age encounters it. The zombie is immortal not because it lives forever, but because it dies and is reborn, again and again, in new forms that speak to new fears. Breathe slowly now, deeply, as we rest in this final understanding. The zombie endures because it is infinitely adaptable, infinitely flexible, a blank screen onto which each culture, each generation, each individual can project their deepest anxieties. It is the most democratic of monsters, belonging to no single tradition, owned by no particular culture, available to anyone who needs a symbol for whatever threatens to overwhelm them, to reduce them, to strip away what makes them human. Close your eyes and consider what the zombie has represented across the long history we have traversed together. In ancient Mesopotamia, when Ishtar threatened to raise the dead, it represented the violation of cosmic order, the boundaries between life and death being breached, the natural hierarchy of existence being overturned. The dead were meant to stay in their appointed realm. When they returned, it signaled that something fundamental had gone wrong with the universe itself. For the Vikings, the Draugr represented greed and the dangers of holding too tightly to material possessions, the dead who could not let go of their treasures, who remained bound to their burial mounds, who became monsters rather than moving on to the afterlife. These were warnings about the poison of possession, about what happens when we value things over souls, when we cling to the material world even when we should release it. Your breathing is steady and calm now, as we continue through these transformations. In medieval Europe, the revenant represented improper burial, unfinished business. The consequences of dying in sin or without proper rites. It was about the importance of ritual, of community, of following the prescribed procedures that kept the living and dead in their proper places. The revenant emerged when the social and religious order was violated, when someone fell through the cracks of the system designed to shepherd souls from life to death to afterlife. In Haiti, in the Caribbean crossroads where cultures collided, the zombie represented enslavement, the ultimate horror of losing yourself, of being reduced to a body without will, without consciousness, without the essence that makes you who you are. The zombie was the worst fate imaginable, not death, which at least offered escape, but a living death where you continued to exist but no longer as yourself. This was not abstract metaphor but concrete reality, the daily experience of slavery translated into spiritual terms, the dehumanization made literal. Let yourself sink deeper now as we move forward through time. In Romero's films and the modern zombie apocalypse genre, zombies became plague, pandemic, the overwhelming horde that represents systemic collapse. They became conformity, the masses moving without thinking, consuming without consciousness. They became consumerism itself, the endless appetite that can never be satisfied, the reduction of humans to nothing but consumption, nothing but appetite, nothing but the drive to take and take and take without purpose or meaning. And in our current age, in these early decades of the 21st century, the zombie is fragmented into 1,000 meanings, adapted to 1,000 fears. It represents whatever we fear most, and we fear so many things now. Consider how the zombie has been deployed in recent years, how it continues to evolve and adapt to contemporary anxieties. The zombie as pandemic, as disease, as contagion spreading faster than we can contain it. This meaning became visceral, immediate during COVID-19, when a real pandemic swept the globe, when people isolated in their homes, when the world shut down and we watched infection rates climb on graphs that could have come from zombie apocalypse fiction. The zombie virus narrative suddenly seemed less fantastic, more prophetic. We understood in our bodies what it meant to fear infection, to avoid contact, to see other people as potential vectors of disease. The zombie as technology, as artificial intelligence, as the machines that might replace us or reduce us. In some modern narratives, zombies are created by nanobots or computer viruses, by technology run amok, by human innovation turned against us. They represent the fear that we might engineer our own obsolescence, that the tools we create might ultimately consume us, that in pursuing progress we might destroy what makes us human. The zombie as environmental collapse, as the consequences of our exploitation of the planet. In some stories, zombies rise because of toxic waste, nuclear radiation, climate disasters, the Earth itself rebelling against human abuse. They represent nature's revenge, the bill coming due for centuries of environmental destruction, the literal return of what we've buried and tried to forget. Our waste, our pollution, our dead coming back to haunt us. Your consciousness drifts now safely, peacefully as we continue through these meanings. The zombie as political enemy, as the dehumanized other, as those we disagree with reduced to mindless monsters. This is perhaps the most dangerous deployment of zombie metaphor, when it's used not to examine our own fears but to justify treating other humans as less than human. In political discourse, calling one's opponents zombies strips them of personhood, makes violence against them seem justified. The zombie metaphor, like any powerful tool, can be used for insight or for harm. The zombie as loneliness, as disconnection, as the isolation of modern life. In some narratives, particularly in Asian zombie fiction, the undead represents so. Shell alienation, the way modern urban life can turn people into isolated individuals moving through crowds without connection, without community, alive but not truly living. The zombie becomes a symbol of depression, of going through the motions, of existing without experiencing, of the spiritual death that can occur even while the body continues. The zombie as aging, as the fear of losing our minds while our bodies persist. This meaning resonates particularly as populations age, as dementia and Alzheimer's become more common, as we confront the possibility of outliving our own consciousness. The zombie, moving, breathing, but no longer themselves, becomes a metaphor for the cruelest aspects of aging, for losing identity piece by piece while still technically alive. Rest deeper now, letting all these meanings wash over you like waves, like the tides of history carrying the zombie from shore to shore, from century to century, from culture to culture. The zombie is the mirror we hold up to. Our age, and it reflects back whatever we bring to it. Every generation sees their own fears in the zombie. Every culture adapts it to their own anxieties. Every individual can find in the zombie a symbol for whatever threatens their sense of self, their sense of safety, their sense of meaning. This is why the zombie never dies, can never die. Because human fear never dies. Because each age has its own terrors, its own anxieties, its own sense that something fundamental is wrong, that collapse is imminent, that the center cannot hold. The zombie is infinitely recyclable because human worry is infinitely renewable. As long as we fear, the zombie will endure, shapeshifting to match the shape of our fears. But here is the profound truth you can rest in now, the understanding that brings peace. The zombie is only metaphor. It is only symbol. It is only the shape we give to formless dread, the name we assign to nameless anxiety. The zombie itself is not real, has never been real in the way we fear. What is real is our consciousness, our humanity, our capacity for meaning and connection and love. What is real is the fact that we are not zombies, that we possess awareness and will and the ability to choose our paths through life. In medieval times, it was improper burial that people feared would create revenants. We know now they were wrong. Bodies decay according to natural processes, influenced by environment and chemistry, but they do not rise and walk regardless of burial practices. In Haiti, it was enslavement that created the zombie tradition, the trauma of dehumanization given symbolic form. The slavery that spawned that tradition is abolished, though its legacy remains, and we understand now that consciousness cannot truly be captured and bottled, that the self is more resilient than the Bokors claimed. In modern times, it is everything that might strip away our humanity, our individuality, our consciousness. We fear disease, technology, environmental collapse, political extremism, social breakdown, isolation, aging, death itself. And we pour all these fears into the zombie, that flexible vessel, that universal symbol, that mirror that shows us our own dread reflected back. But the zombie remains metaphor, remains fiction, remains safely contained in stories and films and games that we can engage with and then step away from. Your consciousness is precious, irreducibly yours, the miracle of awareness that lets you experience this moment, this quiet drift towards sleep. And your consciousness is safe. No Bokor can capture it. No virus can zombify you. No environmental collapse or technological singularity or political apocalypse can reduce you to a mindless shell. You are yourself, fully and completely, aware and present, drifting now not into loss but into rest, not into diminishment but into restoration. The zombie endures in our stories, but you endure in yourself. The zombie shambles through our collective imagination, but you walk through the world with purpose and awareness. The zombie consumes mindlessly, but you experience consciously, choosing what to take in, what to reject, how to interpret and respond to the endless flow of experience that constitutes a human life. Let yourself drift now into peaceful darkness, into rest, knowing that this darkness is not the zombie's mindless void but the natural, necessary darkness of sleep. This is not loss of consciousness but change of consciousness, not ending but intermission, not death but the small death that restores life, that we surrender to every night and emerge from every morning, refreshed and renewed and still ourselves. The metaphor never dies, because we always need metaphors, always need ways to name and shape and understand our fears. But we do not become our metaphors. We remain ourselves, conscious and choosing and capable of rest. The zombie walks in the imagination, but you lie down in peace. The zombie knows no rest, but you know rest intimately, surrender to it willingly, trust it completely. And so our long journey through zombie history ends here, in this moment of understanding and peace. We have traveled 5,000 years, from Mesopotamia to modernity, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Walking Dead, from ancient fears to contemporary anxieties. We have seen how the zombie has served each age, how it has adapted and evolved, how it has remained relevant by remaining flexible, by accepting whatever meaning we need to project onto it. But we have also seen that the zombie, for all its persistence and adaptability, remains only story, only symbol, only the shape we give to fear. It cannot harm you. It cannot reduce you. It cannot strip away your consciousness or humanity or individuality. These things are yours, inalienably, and they remain yours as you drift now past fear, past anxiety, past all the zombies of history and imagination, into simple, peaceful sleep. Rest now in final understanding. The zombie endures, yes, but so do you. He zombie adapts, but so do you. The zombie carries meaning, but you create meaning. The zombie is the mirror, but you are the one who looks, who interprets, who chooses what to see and how to respond. And now you choose rest, choose peace, choose to release consciousness temporarily, trusting it will return, as it always does, as it always will. The zombie shuffles onward through the landscape of human imagination, eternal and adaptable, dying and being reborn, but always ultimately fictional, always ultimately powerless to harm those who understand it for what it is, a mirror, a metaphor, a symbol. And you drift onward through this night toward morning, through consciousness toward dreams, through waking toward rest, as natural as breathing, as necessary as heartbeat, as certain as sunrise. Sleep now. The metaphor never dies, but you need not carry it into sleep. Let it remain in the waking world, where stories and symbols belong. Let yourself sink into the place beyond metaphor, Bayo. ND symbol, beyond story, into simple, profound, peaceful sleep, where no zombies walk, where no fears intrude, where you are safe and whole in yourself, drifting in darkness that is not death but rest, not ending but renewal, not zombie void but human peace. The journey is complete. The understanding is reached. The zombies remain in history and imagination, where they belong, and you remain yourself, drifting now, sleeping now, resting now, peaceful and safe and free. The history of zombies is long and quiet, stretching back through centuries of human fear and fascination. But you need not fear. These are only stories we tell ourselves about the thin line between life and death, sleeping and waking. And now you're crossing that line yourself, into peaceful, restorative sleep, where no zombies wait, only dreams, only rest, only quiet. Good night.